Delighted to introduce our moderator for the next panel, Alexander Pevzner. Alexander is the CEO of Pevzner Greater China Communications. He was the founding China director for the Israel project, and today we welcome him to moderate this panel. He is joined by Dr. Choi Byung-il. Dr. Choi Byung-il is the president of the Korea Economic Research Institute. We're honored to have him here with us. This is a leading think tank on the growth and development of the national economy. He's also a member of the National Economic Advisory Council, a non-governmental member of Korea's FTA Committee, and vice president of the UN Association of the Republic of Korea. We're delighted to have you with us here this afternoon. Oren Rasooli is the co-founder of ChinaCare Israel. ChinaCare Israel was founded in 2012, and it is a company aimed at establishing high-end elderly residence projects in China. In addition, Oren is the managing director of Eyes in China, a consulting and investing company specializing in China's life science sector. And again, we're delighted to welcome you onto the stage. And finally, Achron Chaviv, Levi Shapiro, partner of the JIMMI fund, TMT Strategic Advisors, a partner at the Japan Israel Mobile Media and IT Fund, working with the corporate venture arms of Japanese media and tech companies to invest in Israeli startups, that all too well known and well spoken of important element of the Israeli economy. And we're delighted to welcome the speakers to the panel, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. You already did the introduction, so we'll get right into business. My name is Alex. And before I open the session, I would just like to give you a couple of thoughts as a way of introduction to the subject. We usually think of Asia as vibrant, as dynamic, as the world's economic powerhouse, especially after the global financial crisis in the West. The huge economies of China and India, Japan, that was for many years synonymous with high tech, Korea, an economic miracle. Basically, Asia is the future, but I think not many of us think of Asia as old or getting old. Asia is aging rapidly and actually will become the oldest region in the world in a few decades. By 2050, 62% of the population in the Asia-Pacific region will be above 60 years. And Asia's average age will increase to 40 from 29 just 12 years ago. Japan, a third of Japanese by 2025 will be 60 years and above. China, which has a lot of everything, also will have 250 million people over the age of 60 by 2025. Just for comparison, in Israel, the percentage of people over 65 is only 10%. Now, this phenomenon of aging Asia, this presents challenges and opportunities. Challenges, of course, include a smaller workforce, heavier financial burden on the younger generation, bigger pension liabilities, not to mention the challenges to the society from a different family structure, different society structure. But there are also opportunities created by Asia's golden contingent. A boom in healthcare services, insurance products, travel for the elderly, and new demand for technology products. So what we're here to understand is aging a burden or an asset? And we'll also try to understand, beyond the issues particular to every country, is what Israel has to offer, if anything, to aging Asia. So we'll start by alphabetical order with Dr. Choi Byung-il. Like Jason said, the president of the Korea Economic Research Institute. Dr. Cho, perhaps you can introduce specifically the issues and some numbers and trends in Korea, the fastest Asian society, Asian country in the world.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to organize your conference. Well, a few months ago, when organized a conference, Rebecca called me in the middle of the night and comes with idea of calling me for possible speaker in the session of Aging Asia. Wow, I thought to myself, wow, what a pleasant surprise. Because starting from last year, I'm spreading the message, silver tsunami is hitting South Korea economy, silver tsunami. So I will talk about what is silver tsunami in Korea? Well, number one, Korea is the most rapidly aging society in the world, not only in Asia, in the world. There are 3 stages of aging society, where the demographers classified persons beyond 65 years old, older people, older generation. And when society has 7% of those older generation, they call it society entering aging society. And 14% aged society, and 20% hyper-aging society. So Korea was entering aging society year 2000. And 4 years down on the road, Korea will become aged society. And 2026, then 1 out of 5 people in the street will be very much older people. So it will take 26 years from entering aging society to hyper-aging society. This is unprecedented, the most speedy in the world. Japan, by far the fastest aging society, they took 40 years. So Japan is already in aging society. So by comparison, Japan, when I was visiting Japan a couple of months ago, the headline Nihon Geizai was shrinking population. And 3 million older people and population shrinking. So Korea's number one aging society, the most rapid aging society in the world, is going to have tremendous implication for losing dynamic of Korean economy. And second, on top of that, steadily, the 50 million population in Korea right now is at the peak. And it will maintain at current level, but starting from year 2000, there will be steady declining. So this has much more longer, severe implication. But to make things worse, Korean policymakers and opinion leaders, they don't have any sense of urgency on this important issue. So it's quite obvious if you have commanding post, then you see the silver tsunami is coming in, making big wave, but people, they don't take it seriously. They don't believe this is problem of their generation. So problem is such a grave magnitude, severe.
Okay, silver tsunami, that's interesting. Well, obviously, Thomas Malthus didn't get it right when he said that world population will grow beyond the sustainability of the world. Oren, what is the situation in China?
So China is a fast-aging society, and it's aging fast because of a few things. I have actually a few graphs to show you. But first of all, what we focus on services, basically medical services. But I will try also to provide some additional information about other opportunities. So let's start basically with this graph. What we can see here is the percentage of people aged 60 or above in China. We can see that in the 1950s until basically the 1990s, the numbers did not change. Later on, we're basically right now over here, and we're just a little bit before the curving point. And China is going to have approximately 25% elderly over 65 by 2030. This is mainly because of a few reasons. The first of all is, of course, the increase in life expectancy. But one other very important reason is the one-child policy. Here we can see a graph. Again, this is the age of the population. This is the number of the population. Left is males, right is females. I know the colors don't match, but this is our logo colors, so this is what we had. And this is basically the part of the population we target, people 60, 65 or above. This is 1970. What we can see is called a pyramid, very structured, very organized. We can see that there are a large of people. These people are not working. They're not part of the workforce. But there is a large part of the workforce supporting a small part of the aged population, and there's a good future. This is basically the same graph in 1990. What we could see here, this shrinkage is due to the one-child policy. We can see that very rapidly there's decrease in a whole decade in the number of children. Through the one-child policy, the average birth per woman in China was reduced from 4.3 to 1.6 over a very, very short time. This is the situation today. Let's again try to focus on what we have in the black rectangle over there, and let's see what goes on here. The aged population is growing, and it's becoming into more of a rectangle or something that is called a kite-shaped. This is again 2020, very nearby. And this is the situation 2030. And this is what we expect to see in 2050. This is a great obstacle to the future of China's growth, but also presents a lot of opportunities. China, unlike other countries, is facing this fast aging phenomenon while it's still developing. The country is lacking the social infrastructure, is lacking the physical infrastructure, and is lacking the ability to support them. Basically, even if we think about people in China saving over all their career, and even if they made good salaries in the 3 decades ago, the fast growth eroded their should have been social securities. So again, what we see this is called the 4-2-1 pyramid, or 8-4-2-1. We see that in the near future, starting from about 2020, every person who is going to retire is going to be, or not every, but the majority of people, the largest majority of people are going to retire, are going to be parents of a single child. When that single child is married to a single child, and they're in the 40s, their parents are already retired. They have a single child, or maybe 2 children in the high school age that need support, and they have 4 of their parents who retire. So we have 2 people working, 1 high school child needing attention, needing financing, 4 elderly parents retired with low social security, and maybe on top of that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 8 grandparents. All of them with a very, very low social security, needing high management attention, and needing financial resources to support that. What could be done? There are many, many opportunities. The government is supporting what they call aging in place. That means providing services inside the home of the aged. They don't have the time or the financial resources to develop solutions as they are in other countries, especially in the US, and they're trying to promote services inside the house for the majority of the population, while trying to promote services of not the government, but the economy is promoting services for higher end people outside, designated solutions like what they call CCRC, Community Care Retirement Centers. This is basically it. I will try to summarize that. Later on there will be time for Q&A. What I wanted to mention is one opportunity that actually we just closed yesterday. I came on this morning from China of a project that basically does especially that you take an Israeli technological company, a listed company by the name of WideMed, you combine it, that have a very, very strong software algorithm, you combine it with a local Chinese manufacturer of medical equipment with a strong distribution network in China called DeHire. Both companies are listed, WideMed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, DeHire on the NASDAQ, and you combine them both to create a solution that could be provide services in the home, rely on technology, not like human capital that China is lacking in. All of the world is lacking geriatrics, China especially, and you provide services in the home instead of in facilities. Again, lacking of infrastructure. This is basically the signing ceremony yesterday. And before I know the next slide is going to, I know the next topic is going to be Japan, I want to show basically one short slide about Japan. This is the process that Japan went through. This is Japan in 1950, like we saw China in 1970. This is Japan basically today. And this is Japan in 2050, if I'm not mistaken. 2055, again, male, female, and the same graph, so you can think about it a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Oren. These slides were designed to scare you out of your post-lunch stupor. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the Aging Asia panel. Next is Levi Shapiro. I read in an article about aging Japan, saying that sometime in the 21st century or maybe 22nd century, the last Japanese will disappear. But to me, the Japanese don't seem so worried. They seem quite happy. I mean, Japan is an old society, but a happy one. Maybe perhaps you can say something about Japan.
Good. So I'm going to have a different perspective. I'm much more optimistic. Do you guys know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? The pessimist has more facts. So I don't have any facts in my presentation, but I do have a bit of optimism. I think that the aging society in Japan is a great opportunity for investment. I work closely with very large Japanese corporates who look to Israel for innovative ideas that they can bring to their market. All of the examples suggest that the elderly population that we saw, that distribution, they spend money, they consume, they need services, they need products. And they have more time than they ever had in their lives. They broke their necks till about age 45, working. And now if you ask them what's the most important thing for them, it's the quality of life, it's time with their loved ones. When I lived in Japan, that was the last thing they cared about. They cared about getting ahead in the company, and so they want to consume, but they need products that conform to their world perspective. What does that mean? They're not comfortable in the virtual. It's exotic to them. For a Japanese young person, iMode was launched in 1999. That's basically high-speed mobile internet on your handset. To a Japanese young person, the virtual is reality. To a Japanese over 55, the virtual is exotic. So what are we seeing? Where are the opportunities in Japan in terms of commercial opportunities? Stage one has been services. Japan is very much of a service-oriented culture. Anyone who's been there, you get, you buy maybe a chocolate and it comes in 5 different boxes with a ribbon on top. That's their definition of service. So stage one has been a variety of services catering to this very large and consumptive sector. The opportunity for this room, the opportunity for Israel, the opportunity for early stage companies is what products can you provide that are meaningful to this group? Again, it probably is not going to be a virtual product or an online product, but for instance, one success story has been monitoring chronic disease in the home. An Israeli company based in Ramat Gan is partnering with NTT Docomo, the largest wireless carrier in Japan, and they make it very easy to monitor chronic conditions using your cell phone. So I'm an optimist. I'm probably going to take a very different perspective than maybe even people in the audience. But I know that as I work with companies like Panasonic and Sony, they're literally setting up, they're literally viewing the elderly as one of their best growth opportunities. Panasonic is still 52% Japan revenue, as big of a company as it is. Sony is defining growth outside of consumer electronics. They invested in 30% of Olympus, by the way. They have someone here in Israel whose job is to look for medical-related technologies, mostly imaging. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. The challenge is how do you offer something that's meaningful to a Japanese, given what they've experienced and what they're comfortable with. And we can talk more about that later.
Thank you very much. Dr. Cho, as was clear from Levi's presentation, aging maybe is not such a bad thing. People worked hard, especially the post-World War II generation and their children, and they want to enjoy life. They're having less kids, but they certainly have more money to spend, and because they have less kids, maybe it's less outlay for education, etc. They have more money to spend on themselves. Is aging so bad, actually?
Well, it really depends on what kind of condition you have. Suppose you're quite healthy and you have money which can afford you a very comfortable life, then aging isn't such a that bad ideas. But the problem in China is very severe. In Korea is not that different because depending on economy, some healthcare industry or silver industry, they can have some interesting opportunity for further growth. But when you consider, the typical demand supply condition economy, if you have growing aging population, then total labor supply in economy is going to be decreased unless you're going to have very aggressive immigration policy in place, which I'll talk about. So over time, gradually, total supply in economy is going to be decreasing, But demand will be increasing because these retiring people, they have tremendous money to spend overall. So what will happen in economy is gradual reduction of total capacity while price is going to be increasing. So after all this accumulation will be speak of one inevitable phenomenon, that is low growth. Throughout nation, starting with UK, France, Germany, there's no exception. Okay? There's a tremendous similarity or the correlation between decrease of total labor supply and decreased economic growth. So right now, Korean economy talk about potential economic growth 3%. This is such a detrimental growth because depending on 1% growth potential, we talk about 65,000 good jobs to be made or destroyed. So for Korean economy, which has been registering two-digit or the higher 9-8% economic growth rate during time span of 1960 to 1990s, now the strong engine of the growth is coming to a halt. So silver tsunami is hitting while Korea is entering era of dark age of low economic growth. So this is very worrisome. But to make the situation worse, Korean economy, they didn't develop very effective so-called welfare state system. Still we're debating. But right now, incoming Korean government, Park Geun-hye, Madam Park, their government is promising higher welfare economy, but without asking so much tax hike. But from perspective economists, two things don't add up. So this is virtually impossible. That sooner or later, economy or society will have very severe debate how we will devise taxation scheme. So that is another very important ramification. And lastly, but not least, the fiscal solidarity in South Korean economy is going to be in jeopardy. The one I'm talking about is government debt to GDP ratio about 30% in South Korea right now. That is not that bad compared to 20% in Japan. But South Korean economy, when you talk about this rapidly aging society, so concurrent government, the absorption of welfare spending, and on top of that, some eventual North and South Korea, the unification, then we need to create some buffer zone. And Korean economy is very much, the foreign trade investment interdependent economy. And 1997 foreign financial crisis, 2000 global financial crisis was hitting Korean economy hardest. So suppose you have over a certain percentage of the fiscal solidarity, then whenever exogenous shock is hitting Korean economy hardest, then we'll have very severe consequences. So this is some very dark aspect of Korean economy. So for that reason, I'm talking about silver tsunami hitting South Korean economy.
Thank you very much. I think the issue of fiscal responsibility and taxation is a hot issue is also in this country. Perhaps, Oren, you can address, Dr. Choi was talking about slower economic growth. This is certainly an issue in China, which the previous generation of Chinese leaders were famously promising Baoba to protect the 8% growth rate, and China already slipped beyond that. What do you think is the likelihood of, for example, an end to the one child policy?
So first of all, as you mentioned, China is basically transforming people from the countryside to the city, to intercities. Already over 400 million people moved from being farmers in the countryside to working in cities, either in manufacturing or in service industries. And these are the numbers that the government needs to maintain in order to keep the stability within the country. When we look at what goes on, we see a number of things. First of all, from approximately, if you look at the dry numbers, from approximately 2020, there is going to be a reduction in the total workforce in China. What we see the government trying to do on top of that, the government is increasing taxation to try to create the social security that the country is lacking, which is furthermore increasing the cost of labor in China. And the expectations is that the Chinese government would not be able to maintain the fast growth of 8% as they rely on, and it's going to go down. But furthermore, the government for the past few years had tried to raise pension time in China. Now Chinese people retire at the age of 60. Women retire at the age of 50. For the past 5 years, the government is trying to increase the retirement age to 55 and 60, to 65 and 60, without too much success. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how this is done, especially in the state-owned companies. And it's going to be interesting to see how more and more people would move from the countryside to the cities to replace the retired generation.
So it seems to me that in China the solution is macroeconomic and not on the level of consumer or services. Levi, do you think perhaps you can talk specifically about some products, specific products for the elderly that exist in Japan, and maybe if other countries can learn from perhaps Korea, perhaps other countries, China?
Sure. So first of all, I would argue about everything, but I would argue.
Please do.
I would argue that for this audience, for the Israeli startup who's listening to this panel, the macro is less important. Really, you're a startup. You need your first 5 to 15 customers. Whatever happens in the macro, ups and downs, you just need 5 to 15 customers to get established. And it's sure there's change, but I don't necessarily correlate the success of your startup in getting your first 10 customers in Japan, Korea, China, anywhere else, with whatever the central government is doing in those places. Having said that, they're throwing a big party in Japan. I don't know if you know about this, but in March, there's a new government, a guy named Abe, and he's all about let's spend. There's been deflation for the last 15 years. The target is 2% inflation, and they're going to do that by printing money and spending it. So everybody, including the senior sector, has a bunch of money in their pocket with the goal of stimulating GDP and stimulating inflation, which they, as I said, the target is 2%, but they haven't had inflation since the 80s, basically. Some examples of products that are doing quite well. I said earlier that it's begun, phase one has been oriented towards services. So the pharmacy chains have done a great job of providing services that an elderly or a senior demographic would find relevant. Nutritional seminars, lifestyle workshops, on-site in which they are able to provide an experience for a senior customer. I want to emphasize that they come from an era of physical, tangible products and experiences. You need to offer them a real product and a real experience. That's been successful. The Oren is one of the largest medical device providers. They are automating many of the activities that used to be done in the clinic. This is real. They're giving people a real device that they can use in the home. It could probably be done without a real device, but this demographic is most comfortable having something physical that they can engage with. And Oren's done quite well with that approach. So those are some examples. Again, it's a funny couple of years in Japan. They're going to spend. Of course, they're going to have to pay for that at some point. But for the startups in this audience, if you have something like a home health monitoring tool, if you have something that helps integrate and provides real experiences to a Japanese elderly consumer, I think Japan is very interesting.
Thank you. Well, in Japan there's a party, Japanese maybe say après moi le déluge, but the Korean government, it seems that it's more responsible, at least fiscally, because of this issue of unification with the North and the cushion you need to create. Is there any particular response from the government in terms of policy how to deal with the issue, or are there any particular products and services that you can talk about in Korea?
Well, I will talk about what government is doing, and also I will talk about what government should do. Right now, government is trying to increase mandatory retirement age by, in that way, they try to secure more high quality, skilled labor forces in the longer term. But without talking about wage adjustment scheme, because from company perspective, they tend to appreciate very skilled, mature workforces serving for the company, but their peak time is likely to be gone. So they want to talk about so-called peak rate readjustment. But from Korean labor union perspective, they have no compromise. So this is going to have tremendous implication. On top of that, if you're going to simply increase mandatory retirement age in the economy like South Korea, where the high growth rate is gone, then you talk about taking possible job opportunity from younger generation to giving it to older generation. So we talk about generation possible conflict. So this is something very important. And so government, they simply talk about possible mandatory age retirement for many manufacturing work site, but without talking and negotiating some possible ramification. And second, they try to discuss and even they implemented some ways and means how they can ensure more participation of skilled women labor forces. In South Korea, along with Japan, this is a country where highest percentage of high schoolers are going to college, 82%, the highest in the world. Japan was 67%. So that means, 8 out of 10 high school graduate, they end up with college. Not just training, not just, the typical technical college, but 4-year full spending university. So after that, they don't want to get any job, something like a small and medium enterprise, but they all eye on, the Korean, the big company like Samsung, LGs, or the global company, where job is very much limited. So because of that, as someone said in the morning, Korean high schoolers, they simply they're studying in memorizing, their all eyes geared up, which university they are going. And then 4 years of university education, they busy to accumulate so-called one certificate after another. In their CV, they want to be seen look good in terms of the surpassing screening device. So that much so-called red competition, economy is very much going through sluggish. But the remarkable thing about Korean economy is all these talented girls, after going through all these ups and downs, but once they got married, once they got kids, then they tend to get exit from the company, and most of them, they decide not to come back. Mainly because of they try to compare, they are making very economic decision. They compare with how much money they can generate from working the company versus how much cost they have to sacrifice if they have to let their children's daycare service and education by someone else. Because in South Korea, those costs are tremendously high. So they are making sensible decision making. Each individual making sensible decision making from government perspective, society as a perspective. This is so-called prisoner dilemma situation. So government need to break bad equilibrium. So right now, the incoming government, Park Geun-hye government, they promised to increase some subsidy for daycare service. So we'll see, how that is going to be effective. So that's very much, short-term policy, micro-policy response. But in the long term, what is inevitable is Korean economy, they need to come up with so-called very ambitious, proactive global talent attraction policy, so-called immigration policy reform. But I don't think that's going to be very easy. Japan, they had already failed because along with Japan and South Korea, they teach their children in social class textbook, we are, the single-blooded ethnic. So we don't want to get that, single blood can be somehow get confused. So because of that tradition, it is very difficult to even talk about this issue. But without having very proactive global talent attraction policy, not only, filling up small and medium-sized enterprise, which was very much avoided by Korean younger generation, but companies like Samsung, LGs, POSCOs, how they want to attract, very talented, super talented engineers and designers from Israel, India, and so on. So this is long-term challenge. Korean, policy makers and politicians, they should, hurry up and make some tangible decision on this regard. But something I suspect that's not going to come in a few years down.
Okay, maybe one day we'll see Israeli engineers heading to Korea and Japan. It seems that Western countries have already discovered immigration to battle slow growth or the slowing economy. And Dr. Choi mentioned the cost of having children. Here in Israel, we also know that children are an expensive pleasure. But Oren, how well do you think the Chinese government is dealing with the shrinking workforce? Because we see already that, for example, sort of manufacturing hubs are to a certain extent already leaving China to Cambodia, to Vietnam, to Indonesia, other low-cost countries. And Dr. Choi mentioned that 82% of Koreans graduate from college. That's very high. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang also mentioned that one of the big tasks of the new leadership of the Chinese government is to find a job for all these college graduates. How well do you think the Chinese government is dealing with the issue of aging?
So first of all, the Chinese government, I think it's a little bit puzzled. It doesn't know exactly what to do, doesn't know exactly how to react, but it's working in a quite structured way. I think the experiment that they started in 1980, 1978 with the one-child policy was great, that it actually allowed to focus a lot of resources on 1 or 2 generations, on one child in every family. But now it's payback time. So in that there's a little bit of problems for the government. But the government is trying to shift from labor manufacturing to a more high-tech manufacturing. The government is encouraging to move in knowledge into the country. You see that, for example, with SFDA, if you would want to register a device today from Israel in China, the service would be relatively long. If the same device would be assembled in China, basically you are bringing knowledge, you are setting up manufacturing facilities, you are creating work places, the SFDA process would be much, much shorter. This is exactly the process we're doing currently with one of our clients, and we managed to get SFDA within 6 months compared to 18 months that it took us a few years back. So the government is encouraging bringing in knowledge and not only relying on the Chinese cheap labor force, because it's not cheap. The RMB is appreciating. The RMB, the Chinese currency, is becoming stronger. It was fixed to 8.27 for a very long time. Now it's around the 6.8 or something. I think this is what I got yesterday in the bank. The social system that we talked about before is increasing the cost of labor. The numbers of people being able to move from the countryside into the cities is reducing. So again, the cost of labor is going up. And the answer the government is looking for is, it's looking for more high-end products, more innovative products, and this is exactly where there are opportunities for Israeli companies. And it's looking to shift the economy into a more service-oriented industry, a service-oriented economy. If we look in the United States, today in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, approximately 4% of populations is part of the agriculture sector. In China, it's about 40. So these numbers are going to go down, and these people are going to be either in manufacturing or the even larger growing service sector.
Silver tsunami, payback time. This is forming to be the most depressive panel of today. But and I'm not sure we have the solutions, but we'll get to that.
If you want, I can talk about there are also a lot of opportunities.
We'll get to the opportunities. Levi, is there a specific policy in place from the Japanese government to deal with aging population beyond the sort of initiative of private companies? For example, immigration policy?
Sure. So there's a limit to what governments can do, particularly when it's a Japanese government. We've seen that they aren't very effective at changing the direction of the economy. A great example, you may not know this, and I mentioned this over lunch, but Japan has per capita among the lowest rate of sexual activity among married couples in the developed world, 35 times per year. So the government, yeah, the Europeans are very high, if we have any Europeans in this audience. That's another productivity question. But the government wants to increase the birth rate. How exactly are they going to do that? So, they can set targets of more activity among married couples. Okay, good luck. I don't know. I have some doubts as to what the government can and can't do. Certainly, immigration culturally is completely unacceptable. Culturally, they just won't tolerate a heavy immigration policy. The goal is to enhance productivity by expanding the female workforce participation, which will probably have a direct correlation with an even lower birth rate than 1.3. So this Abe government, which started in March, they've set a goal for 30% of senior executives and director level to be female. Again, this is another government target. I don't believe it. I don't think it's going to happen. But the net of that is probably that 1.3 becomes perhaps 1.2. Was there another part of this question, or was it just about me talking about statistics about things I shouldn't have been talking about?
If the Japanese government is trying to do something in the sense of policy, for example, Dr. Choi mentioned that the Korean government is trying to subsidize daycare. Is there something similar in Japan? I mean, beyond trying to encourage people to, get it.
Not only daycare, but the more allowance for the children and so on.
No. I mean, that's the easy answer is no. These are very hard cultural choices. You're asking society to adapt, and it's not a society that has been very good at adapting. So my answer is no. They're not doing enough to encourage a higher birth rate. They're not doing enough to encourage immigration. It's very difficult. If you, a very famous American professor from Columbia University, in order to demonstrate solidarity with Japan after the tsunami in March 2011, had to renounce his American citizenship in order to make himself a Japanese citizen. Donald Keene, famous Japanese literature professor. You can't be both. In Israel, I bet half of the hands in this room will go up if I ask who has dual citizenship. And that encourages a dynamic immigration environment. The answer to your question is I don't see it, and if you do, let me know. I haven't seen it in Japan.
Okay, so immigration to Asia is difficult culturally. Having children is expensive and also maybe difficult for some. Dr. Choi, perhaps you can talk specifically about some, if there are any specific products, Korean companies that at least create products for such a high percentage of elderly citizens?
Well, before talk about those, the fancy product, I just want to talk about the case of smart TV. Everyone knows what is smart TV. The big movie screen like a flat display attached to your wall. All this internet surfing function and so on, produced by LG and Samsung. I have one in my home. So I gave as a Parents' Day souvenir to my old parents, but they have so much complaint. They don't know how to use it. Okay? First of all, they complain it's so difficulty of moving around between different channels. So when you consider all the simple dial-up TV, you can at least choose the TV station you want to see. But so much bewildering array of choices, like 100 TV stations available, but you don't know which one it is, and even difficulty of choosing it. And not to mention, the useless advantage of all this super fancy internet service and so on. So what I want to talk about is all this generation. Perhaps we are something like that, digital illiterate. Okay? So we may become obsolete. So from innovative perspective, they need to constantly focus on what class of consumers we are targeting. So old generation, they tend to be very simple. Like their memory capacity is very shrinking, and their range activity is very limited. So they don't want that fancy stuff, but easy to use. So I heard a very interesting case of so-called transparent refrigerator. You heard about this? Because in old generation, they have so much shopping, but simply stack up their refrigerator. They do not know what is in there. So they keep purchasing the same beef, same chickens, and simply they're stacking up. So the refrigerator tend to have so old aged, useless stuff, and you don't use it quite effectively. So to avoid this problem, in your refrigerator, you can see what is inside without opening it up. So very transparent. So this is something you can think about. And also, I have many of my friends, their parents live up to the 90, but all of a sudden, I got death notice. I attended the funeral service. Why dad, despite leading so much long, healthy life, all of a sudden they suddenly passed away because they are bad. They had difficulty of standing up in the bed in the middle of the night, go to the washroom, and then they fell off from the bed. And when you're getting old, your bone is very much vulnerable. So somehow, if you fall off, then very difficult to recover. And also, you don't have anyone around the home, so it takes such a longer time from the scene of an accident to the hospital. So for instance, if you have very effective monitoring system from the scene and to the ambulance, constantly monitoring, that kind of service is something you can think of quite effectively. So, but my worry is if that happens, then we'll talk about much more in aging societies and much more in a longer life. So I do not know what is implication, but at least from company's perspective, those is something absolutely essential for this elder generation to live much more, live happy and longer life.
Well, a transparent refrigerator was my dream for several years already. Seriously, I always thought, why there's no such product, and now I discovered there is one. It's great. So perhaps not to sink completely into depression. Maybe Oren, you can talk about some of the solutions, opportunities. Please tell us something positive. What Israel can offer to aging China and Asia.
So first of all, I want to start with a small funny story I had basically 3 days ago.
That's good.
With one of my employees. We were sitting over dinner, and he said that his grandmother complained that he did not give her enough money for the Chunje, for the Chinese Spring Festival.
It's a tradition for children to give money to their parents in China for the
Exactly.
Chinese New Year.
So, and again, the guy is a great guy. He graduated. He has a master's degree. He earns an okay salary, earns more than 10,000 RMB, and he gave his grandmother. I asked him, how much did you give her? He said, I don't want to talk about it. I asked him, is it more than 1,000 RMB? Thinking that 1,000 RMB is a lot of money. He said, what do you mean 1,000 RMB? If I give him 1,000 RMB, he should not talk to me. Apparently, it's something in the 20 to 30,000 RMB a year that he gives his grandparents as a gift. So when we look at these people, even though they have low social security, they still have their children, their grandchildren, giving them some money. So where does that create opportunities? First of all, in products. But maybe I would get out of the medical, of my comfort zone, which is medical sector, and try to think about something else. Gaming. We're using the technology, we're using the Wii and all these stuff on day-to-day life for our games. This can be shifted into something for mental, for dementia. This can be shifted for physiotherapy. These people, the elderly people, can find ways to enjoy the technology for their benefits. If I go back to I believe there is a lot to do in that, in shifting the day-to-day technology that we use today to cater for elders, especially using all kind of motion detectors, motion sensors that we are accustomed to use. This mobile phone can detect if I'm looking at it, if I'm moving it and the such. If you take these ideas, put them into services or products for the elders, I believe this could be a great market for not only in China but in other places. Particularly in China, if you look at knowledge transfer, we're currently assisting Asuta Hospital. Actually, we're presenting a Chinese hospital in the city of Changzhou. They're looking for knowledge. So we're helping Asuta Hospital connect to them and basically help them set up knowledge, medical service knowledge, geriatric knowledge, and the such. There is a lot in, as I mentioned before, about wide and de-hire for medical devices. Either medical solutions that would need small minor adaptations, or medical solutions that would be developed especially for these markets. When you look at these markets, this is not the US that each and every Israeli company is thinking of. Markets where they're reimbursable is the most important part, where you get money from the insurance companies, so you use a lot of disposables and the such. These markets have different purchasing behaviors. So when you think about a product, either an upgrade or the innovation of a new product, and you're thinking about these opportunities, try to see how you learn how the market operates from the design stage. There are many other ideas I can think about, but I think the time is short, I could see.
Yes, I think Oren's story about how much money you give to your mother during the Chinese New Year raises an entirely different question, which is not a subject of today, but who should take care of the elderly? I mean, we think that the government should take care of them, we think about the pension system, and maybe it's the responsibility of the family. Levi, you bring basically Japanese investors, or you're trying to connect Japan and Israel together in the area of technology. Could you talk about some examples from your work, what Israeli companies can offer for the aging but happy Japanese elderly person?
Sure. So one of the messages that I think everybody in this room sort of agrees upon, because we're here at the Asia Summit, is that there's more outside of Silicon Valley than we've been sort of appreciating. Silicon Valley is very important for Israel. It's the reason we've gotten to the level we've gotten, but we need to focus on other very important, large, and consumptive markets. I happen to focus on Japan. I'd like to tell an example, but I'd also like to make this an analogy for the startups in this room about how to approach Japan. With the aging society, hierarchical and seniority-based large companies, you name them, Toyota, Sony, etc. I worked in Tokyo for Toyota for 5 years. I've seen this. You get to a certain level, and then you get pushed upstairs. You no longer have anyone you manage. You know, a senior executive, by about age 50, it's very clear that they're sort of by the window. I call them ex-emperors, and my suggestion, my Japan market entry strategy suggestion, is to find yourself an emperor. Japan is full of them. And all of the people who are below them in a hierarchical structure have to take the meetings out of obligation, have to listen to what they're selling. And good news, these emperors are cheap. They just want to be fulfilling their professional and career objectives rather than making a lot of money off of your startup. So the example I want to use is a very, I don't know if the visitors have heard this word. There's a word called chutzpah, which, anybody want to translate that? I don't know how to translate.
Japanese, I don't know.
No, chutzpah is nerve. Daring.
Yeah.
So a classic Israeli chutzpah company is called Dog TV. It's television for dogs. The dog is supposed to watch the television. That's daring.
Is it an old dog, or?
All dogs, any dogs. Essentially, the sell is assuaging the guilt of the owner who leaves their best friend at home all day long while they're gone. So obviously in the United States, where 40% of the population owns a dog, they spend an average of something like $30 a month on their dog, an extra $5 a month for a subscription VOD television channel for their dog, not a problem. So the second market we focused on was Japan. Again, this is, it's the same message, and we found a former president of Sony's venture capital fund who was an emperor with some time on his hands. And right away, he got us into the largest cable operator, which is based in the Kyoto area. I would say find yourself an emperor. They can get you in the door. They have the relationships and skills that you'll never have, in the same way that a startup here puts sales and marketing in Palo Alto or New York. this is a cost-efficient way to enter the Japanese market.
Thank you. Find yourself an emperor or at least get a dog.